All right, hello and welcome back. This is the third episode of Brainstorming for the Delving High story. We are picking up today about probably 8 hours of brainstorming after the second episode. So I have spent some time in between, mostly working on some uh, classes that I'll be showing you in a quick second here. Over the course of those, 8-ish hours, I have had a few different thoughts. So that's going to adjust, change a little bit of what we've already sort of laid out or considered. So I'll overview that quickly, and then we'll get into the main focus of today, which is going to be actually building out sort of a book of mobs um, that our characters are going to be encountering in the sim. So, in terms of changes so far, or I should say changes since the last uh, touch point, the probably the biggest one that is going to have the farthest reaching consequences is a filter. So, I had this idea, or the sort of the more I thought about what we laid out in the first two episodes, the more I was sort of questioning this idea of we're writing this story at the freshman level. So the main characters are all going to be 15 years old. They're all going to be freshmen in high school. The uh, there's a certain balance I'm hoping to strike between combat, uh, intrigue, or I should say like curiosity, that sort of thing. Novelty is maybe the best word. So combat, novelty, social elements, things like that, and jumping right into a full-fledged dungeon crawler Carl is probably not what we want to do. I've been listening to a lot of author interviews, and one of the comments I heard, I think this might have been from Joe Abercrombie, was putting a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old into a combat situation is not going to result well. They really are not equipped. Obviously, none of us would be essentially, but especially a freshman in high school is not going to have the wherewithal to um, excel in that scenario. So I thought, how can I find a middle ground that's going to maintain those interesting elements of a dungeon diver while also leaning into, rather than trying to circumvent, how can we lean into this idea of like we're accommodating the sim a little bit so that it's a better fit for like a freshman. Um, Couple that with probably the other big idea I had, which was as I got into building out a little bit more of kind of the world behind Delving High, it seemed to make more sense that rather than go with the roguelite mechanic that I'd originally thought, I think that works well in isolation. Like if there was a different um, scenario behind the high school, but considering the fact that the purpose of this whole sim is essentially to act as entertainment to distract the entire world from destroying itself, I think it makes more sense that we have the continuity of just a typical lit RPG rather than a roguelite. So we are gonna be changing that here um, to just kind of the more typical or traditional lit RPG style. Um, Maybe last thing, because this is going to be important before we get into the mobs. Some of the ideas I had for that filter I referenced would be kind of changing the uh, sort of reskinning each mob to be a little bit less like gross or uh, realistic, if that's the right word. Um, Leaning into some ideas that are more common in middle school, high school, um, and kind of putting a like a PG-13 on this. Like I said, one that's helpful for the ideal reader of this book. It's helpful for the characters. It's also helpful for me because I don't want to be writing about some of the abomination type things you do read about in these stories. So, uh, what I'm imagining for some of the mobs is to break them out. Let me jump into my mob sheet here. Break them out into sort of three groups. So, myth, food, and tech. I think these are all kind of interesting categories. I've got enemies kind of grouped into different roles. So, like a tank, a magic user, ranged, aggro, things like that. And the idea is to build out, a few hundred different types of enemies that, as we're going through the story, we can pull from. I have already created the classes, so we'll take a quick look here. Pull this up. I guess I'm not quite sure if this will actually show. Might have to switch. Perfect. Yeah, I think it is showing. So this is a Google sheet. I went through and identified 15 variants of each class. So if you're following along with our plot, uh, we go through quite a few sims. Kind of the first arc of our story is Jack and his squad go through quite a few sims. The purpose of, let's call it, this initial unit is for the characters to gain a lot of experience with their class, figure out what sort of playstyle they like, and then at the end of their unit, they're presented with various variants. The variant is a specialized form of the class that gives extra abilities and bonuses in one area, while sort of uh, shoehorning the playstyle a little bit. So I went through and created those variants. So there are 9 classes. Each class has 15 variants, and they have different sort of abilities. So you can see here, like there's a tank variation of the archer called a tethero, and each arrow they shoot tethers the archer to the mob or to the enemy, and there's sort of like a health drain effect going on. So the archer's getting healed, the enemy's getting drained, and this is like a tank slant on the archer. So a whole bunch of them, lots of fun, quirky mechanics I came up with. This was where most of the 8 hours was spent, was developing this list. I also made a few key decisions in the course of this. So I decided that Jack is going to be a ranger. So they're going to be a balanced, kind of the most balanced archer. So a blend of kind of your typical damage, uh, long range damage, um, a blend of stealth, and then kind of up close work with the knives. Most of the other archer classes slot into one of those three and are much better at one of those three than the ranger is, but the ranger is much more balanced and is able to kind of do it all. Um, Down here we've got Atlas, so I changed Atlas's last name to Preston. I think that's going to be apparent why in a second. But I built him as a gravitas knight. I guess I should probably figure out how to pronounce that, but I do really like that word. So quite a few different sorts of knights. My idea for um, Jack, Atlas, and Chandler, who is going to be kind of the third character of their squad, is that uh, they've decided to join together first and foremost because they they all sort of feel like they're the bottom of the rung. They are a little bit, out from the group, but also they're supposing that the fourth player they can get, who I haven't actually identified yet, but the fourth student is going to like really complement them all and bring all of their various classes together. So the idea is these three are not necessarily going to work well together from a class perspective, and that's going to create some added challenge and that sort of thing that should make the story more interesting. So Atlas is a gravitas knight. His ability, he's more of a support knight. He's got a little bit of that tanking ability, but primarily he has various abilities that can affect gravity. So I could imagine this working well with Jack in terms of helping Jack's arrows to land, um, things like that. But more so, it's a tactical. advantage. You know, you can get pretty creative if you can control gravity to some degree. And considering Jack uh, is going to have almost no magic in his kit, he's pretty much going to be a standard ranger. Um, I needed a character that had some sort of tactical crowd control stuff, um, even if it's not necessarily a direct complement like some of these other knight variants or other classes could have been. So that's Atlas, and then Chandler uh, changed his name to Chandler Bellward from I think it was Charlie Shelley or something like that. He is slotting into the other class, and he's choosing what I think is probably going to be the most interesting variant of the whole thing, which is a tamer. So, you know, we've got like 150 or so variants in here. Several of them can control mobs, they can create mobs in one form or another. But the tamer is essentially it's a bit like Pokemon. Is the idea is that Chandler would have a handful of abilities that help him befriend or tame mobs, and if he can form some sort of a connection with them, then they will work with him. I don't actually want it to be like magically rooted. I don't want it to be like a brain control or mind control sort of thing. I want it to be like a relationship based variant. And kind of the key here is that Tamer is seen as a much worse variation of some of the other ones I've got, like a golemic mage who can create golems, or there's a handful of let's see, might have some other ones in here, but a handful of other uh, variants that can create or summon uh, kind of pets or mobs to fight for them. So those are our characters. Again, that's where most of the time in the brainstorming has been spent. I filled out a little bit of these other sort of subcategories of our plot. I've also started chapter one, which is fun. So I'm sort of building that out and trying to get some momentum going based off of the ideas. So that being said, I think we are ready to go into the mob section. So we're going to try and build out just lots of different creatures here, um, and keep this like the goal is for each one to have kind of a unique aesthetic, to not be too gruesome or anything like that, but just be interesting, different, and then slot into some of these various uh, roles. So I had I guess three thoughts already, just randomly. So starting off with those. So um, tank, lots of different things. I think spaghetti could be really cool. You know, we don't have great names for these yet, but um, that's kind of secondary to figuring out what the aesthetic and the role is. So the spaghetto or spaghetti monster, I think it's going to have a lot of CC, and it'll be really good at sort of grabbing with its noodle arms and stuff. And then I think if we combine that with like a snowball idea, that could be really interesting. So how about can roll over other spaghettos to become larger and stronger. So now we've got something kind of interesting. My goal is to have like a little variation, or I should say a little nuance on each of these, or at least on many of them, because if we had stopped this spaghetto here and just said it has a lot of CC abilities, grabbing with noodle arms, it's basically a tank that has a little CC, right? That's it. It's not that flavorful. It's kind of bland, which is fine if this is going to be like a very basic mob. But if we can sprinkle in neat things like this every once in a while, where all of a sudden now this can roll over other spaghettos to become larger and stronger, now we're presenting opportunities where, like back in our our variants, if a mage gets an ability that like duplicates a pet or something like that, now all of a sudden we've created a an opportunity where, maybe students are trying to pair like a like a tamer or one of those other variants with this mage that has that duplication ability, and they're trying to build up like a really strong spaghetto. Um, because we've introduced this little mechanic here, it's gonna, pinball off of the, 150 other mechanics that we've laid out here in the variants. So that's the idea. So we'll just kind of go through and see if we can do that sort of thing. So right away with the ice cream monster, I'm thinking it's going to be weak to fire, of course, has to be. Um, I could see this having some sort of a like an enveloping attack where it sort of uh, surrounds surrounds somebody and sort of like freezes them. I guess ice magic would probably be the most logical. We've got this in the tank slot, which I think is fine. Ooh, how about we do something like this? Depending on how many scoops it has, that's going to affect something. Um, we could have it be health again. I think that's fine if it's in the food class. So more scoops equals more health. Um, Thinking about regrowing. I don't know that that makes a lot of sense here. What we could do, this is kind of fun, is have a kind of a two-phase mob where the top is the ice cream and the second phase is the cone. I'm realizing now this is going to be a difficult episode if I'm actually trying to write out my notes. So the ice cream phase, we want these to be sort of two separate, distinct kind of combat sets. So to me, cone is much more obviously the tank part. Doesn't seem like a cone can do a lot besides roll. Um, and I'm just thinking of a little bit of flavor here. We could call this like a stale cone. That would explain why it would be like pretty hard or sturdy. So if the cone is like the tank part, then the ice cream is almost like the cone is like the steed carrying the ice cream. So then the ice cream would be some sort of like a light infantry sort of mob. So we could have it be like shooting ice attacks. I think that could be fine. Um, yeah, we'll just go with that for now. So the quirk with this one, it's two phase. If we've got things related to like, variants related to phase enemies, then that's kind of an interesting combo. Otherwise, anytime a mob does something you're not expecting, like, you kill the ice cream and then the cone keeps attacking you, that's kind of interesting. We'll go down here with the in the magic section. So I had an idea about a phone with the charger pogo stick. I thought that kind of just sounded fun. That came out of nowhere. And we sort of already have this one, but its main ability is to reflect and distort spells. So it's kind of a support mob. So they don't really have support as a group here, but that's okay. All right. So I think we've officially left the kiddie pool. And now we've got to go into the deep end. Um, this will kind of be an interesting one because typically with this sort of idea, like I said, with 150 roughly classes, that was about 8 hours or a little more. So you can do the math and realize that it's kind of slow going. But let's do our best here and see if we can identify some interesting mechanics and interesting foods. So let's stick with our food, I think, in the tank category. That sounds kind of fun. How about a hard-boiled egg? Now, obviously, these are not going to be the names that stick. Right now, I think it's worth just trying to identify the look and the abilities, and then coming through here with a second pass and kind of adding some flavor, giving it a nice, a neat name, um, that sort of thing. So, what would an egg do? These are the big questions. Let's say it's very resistant to physical damage. We could have another rolling thing here. Of course, that's always potential. How about we do something with exploding? Um, like like it's being cooked too much and the egg is gonna burst out of it. How do we pair that with a tank idea? I am tempted for a second. So what I'm thinking of, let's see if I can pull this one out. Um, find our tanks here. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if I'm gonna find it as quickly as I want. But basically, I had a some sort of a tank variation that, as it took damage, it eventually, saved up that damage and released it as a bomb. I think that was one of the pyro ones actually. Yeah, Blastion here. So as this class or variant takes damage, it stores it in bombs, and it's able to release those. I think having something like that could be interesting here. And what I meant earlier by I would say I'm a little bit tempted right now, is that we have 150 of these variants. It could be sort of interesting to create like an inverse of each one of those as the mobs. Um, so just looking at like a random one here, emits huge explosion when grievously wounded, survives on 1 HP. Funny, I clicked on that one. That's actually sort of similar to what I was imagining for the egg here, where, imagine it's super resistant to physical damage. As it takes physical damage, it starts to crack. That would seem like a good thing, but if it actually cracks due to physical damage, it explodes, in like this egg explosion. I think that's kind of a neat mechanic. Needs to be slain with magic damage. I think that's neat. And I am kind of wondering if just going off that inverse strategy is going to be easier for me because it gives me something to reverse every time. I don't know. Let's just keep going like this for a little bit. We'll see. All right, so maybe one more question. I've got 15 variations of each class here. How many variations do I want of each of these? More is definitely better, but maybe there were like 10 of each subclass. So 10 food tanks, 10 food magic users, 10 food ranged, etc. And then same for myth and tech, that might be good. Let's shoot for that. Let's put it in writing, make it happen. 10 variations of each subclass. So definitely not going to be able to get through that here. Maybe the goal today is like get through, tank or something. That would be 30 variations. That'd be sort of interesting. And then you can imagine the remainder here is sort of rinse and repeat. Just keep scratching your head and see what comes out. So we've got the spaghetto, the ice cream monster, hard-boiled egg. I need to keep drinking this thing over here. Every time I do, I get an idea. So I just had Another idea here, I think Bagel Blaster might actually be what the name is going to stick with. Um, let's move this from tank down to magic. I think that's going to be a better fit. So Bagel Blaster draws magic into center and shoots. I've got a class called Channeler over here somewhere. And as I'm writing this, I'm realizing this is kind of a nice uh, foil or opposite. I feel like it might be good to have a word for this, for match, or something that sort of signifies this is like the counterpart. Not sure. But you can see kind of this bagel if it's essentially has a charge time on each spell, but it's drawing it into that gap in the middle of the bagel, and then that's what it's blasting out from. I think that's interesting. That's good. Okay, we got to do some stuff with pizza, right? Hmm. Let's say the Bagel Blaster also has high mobility and rolls around. Okay, I think pizza could actually be interesting here. What would this fit into? Swarmer? Let's put it under Swarmer. Or how about Quirky? I think that's better. So let's imagine every pizza mob is a slice, and its goal is to meet up with other slices to form a full pizza. And if it does, it sort of gets some big upgrade. I think that's pretty neat. Ooh, let's do a marshmallow thing that eats like a Kirby, um, like from Super Mario. So marsh, and I could see another word here kind of being the end of the name. Um, marsh swallow, something like that, instead of mallow. I think that's probably good enough to stick with. That is how you spell swallow, right? One degree in English, but I think I'm losing this battle. All right. So super tanky, um, semi-resistant to physical damage, swallows stuff. All right, I think I did get swallow spelled correctly. That's a win. All right, marsh swallow, spaghetto. Those are probably our only. Oh, and bagel blaster. Those are the probably permanent names we've figured out so far. It's kind of nice when they fall into place. Um, let's see. Let's switch to tech for a second and go with some variation on the KitchenAid, which is a big mixer. Change that so we don't get sued. I'm imagining all sorts of like this thing is spinning and all sorts of things are flying out. So I guess this would actually be arranged to be a ranged mob. Because it does seem like when you're using the mixer, there's always flour flying out. If you drop your spatula in, that's going to get fired out up to the moon. So this is sort of like a random, um, highly volatile mob that can hurt other mobs just as easily. As we're going through this, I think it'll be interesting to keep an eye out for what sort of things Chandler might be, looking for. Um, because ultimately, what his focus will be once he sort of gets on board and decides to really do this is to try to shore up the gaps in their team. Um, so they're going to be looking for some sort of a healer because Chandler can't really do any, Jack can't, and Atlas can't either. They're all they were all sort of banking on gaining a healer as their fourth slot. Um, so we will need some mobs here that have some healing abilities, but we're still about 300 mobs short of our goal here, so I think we've got a while to go. What else do we have? Um, we could have. I thought I had was like a flying chip bag that is sort of like a heat-seeking missile and then just explodes when it gets near somebody. I am thinking about the aesthetic of this. Um, Obviously, we're trying to avoid every monster being a Frankenstein. That is not the tone I'm trying to hit with this book. Also, don't necessarily want to feel like a La La Land where it's all gumdrops and rainbows. Um, yeah, I think even if the mobs are pretty over the top kiddish, which is the intention here. I obviously know this is like some of this stuff is not uh like is too childish for a freshman. That's the idea. Um I think it's okay to have mobs in that sort of tone because there's going to be a pretty scary backdrop of uh the students only have one hero life, and if they lose it, then this is pretty much their chance. Their only shot is gone. So I think that's enough. We can still kind of play here. So with that, let's drop our chip bag in there. About a torpedo. That's pretty good, I have to say. Hopefully we won't get sued for that one. Dorito torpedo. Portmanteau. Heat-seeking. Boy, it's hard to spell and talk at the same time. Heat-seeking missile that explodes near students, releasing chip dust or chip dust gas, let's call it that. Debuff. All right, that's pretty nice. Guess we're gonna stick with the food theme today primarily. Hmm. How about a uh, something that multiplies itself over time? Picturing like a grapevine. Um, or yeah, I feel like grapes could be interesting. I was gonna go with like bananas or something, but I think grapes could be neat because you can have the vine growing, and it kind of gives a proxy for where the like explosion of grapes is going to occur. Um, Swarmer, we'll put this in here, I guess. So the grapevine um, vine grows along a surface. Seconds later, the grapes appear, grow bigger, and explode. That's pretty fun. I mean, who would not like to fight against one of those? Um, we could call it like a boom vine. How does that look as a word? I'll leave that for now. Minion. I think by this I just meant like a super weak mob that is pretty much just filler and isn't going to like really present a challenge, like not be that interesting, just be um, background music, I guess you could say. Crackers can be pretty boring. I, Crackerjack. How about this? It's a person made out of crackers. That actually sounds pretty like a pretty fun mob to find. Generally weak. Yes, I do know Crackerjack is a thing. Let's see. It is sort of nice, I think, to have some humanoid stuff. Like if we can, and maybe this is a better approach. You know, like I think the boom vine is really interesting, but the if the thing is a walking vine, if it's a vine like a humanoid vine that grows grapes along itself that keep exploding, I think that's also cool. Um, so maybe let's add this into, that would be super aggressive, I guess. How about a boom walker? Something. Vine is humanoid. Yeah, I think that's fine. Sharing some of the name is good. I think it gives a little narrative tissue to this, makes it seem like there's a little bit more connection. So I like the idea of having more of these humanoid food intersections. I think that's probably better than just having a bunch of things like bagel blasters and spaghetti balls rolling around. So what else would be in that humanoid category we could think of? Peanut butter. That's always good. Let's put that in the tank area here. Um, we'll leave the night crew to figure out a nice name for this one. But core is peanut butter, has peanuts along outside like hard scales. And we gotta say that these are unshelled, or maybe in shell is better. As it takes damage, the shells break, then peanuts break, then peanut butter. I do have to say, so we've obviously got a lot of food stuff going on. I'm wondering if we want to build any mechanics in for, let me take that back. We do have some mechanics for cooking in the sim. Um, like we've got a crafter that can basically auto cook and do things like that. And we've got a specific class called a cook that is a healer variant that prepares food before each battle, and it gives like some pretty strong buffs. So cooking is a mechanic in there. Yeah, I think for now let's just assume that when things like these are slain, they're going to drop certain things, and some of those things will be food, like it would obviously be peanut butter or marshmallows or egg, um, things like that, and then the students can use those in various recipes within the sim to gain buffs. That's kind of nice because it gives another uh, slant on how to play the game. If you intentionally seek out certain mobs that you want to slay so that you can cook something particular to gain a certain buff, that's like a realistic strategy. Peanut butter person. How about PB and I feel like we need a, can we come up with something interesting here? I'm trying to come up with a variation of PB and J, like peanut boy and yeah, whatever. We'll just leave it at PB and J for now. All right, another food. Hmm. How about for magic? Let's have some sort of a frozen thing. Um, how about dry ice? Well, that's not food, but emits serious fog that contains debuffs. Could do something a little bit boring like this. Call it Drice. Just stick those words together. We'll just stick with that for now, but I think that's good for food. How about some sticking with the frozen theme here? Um, let's shift this over to tech. Thinking of like a frozen pole of some kind. You touch it, you stick to it. This is the Christmas story in action here. Yeah, probably the best thing is just to leave the generic names here and come back to them. Takes a little too much effort to try to figure those out on the fly. We're going to try and come up with stuff fairly quickly. All right, back to food. How about this? What would this be? Probably a swarmer. The idea was like salami or something like that, some sort of lunch meat. Yeah, let's just stick with lunch meat. Piles on you and slowly saturates you with debuffs. That's pretty great. It is not a commentary on anything. Yeah, I think that's kind of fun. These could be like pepperonis specifically, because pepperonis would be kind of be smaller and lean into that swarmer mentality a little bit. Oh, I should say, like, obviously these mobs are going to be bigger than their normal counterparts. These pepperonis might be the size of like dogs or something. What I'm thinking is like this is fine, but it would be a little bit better if there was some sort of added flavor here. Like instead of it just being a pepperoni, is it's got to be sort of in the shape of something else. Um, and then if you've got a name that kind of pulls that together, which I don't right now, but I think that's what you're looking for. It's you've got a mechanic, which is debuffs. You've got a connection from that mechanic to the thing, which is that lunch meat is not very good for you. You've got sort of a quirky thing, which is that it's in the shape of a dog, and then if the name relates to that, it's like, okay, I got it. That's kind of a rounded out mob. All right. Ooh, so okay, so if it's gonna be in the shape of a dog, this has got to be something with dog pile, right? Um, Dog piler, something like that. We're kind of missing the lunch meat fact in the name though. Lunch meat is typically layered on itself in a sandwich. How about this? I think we're getting there. Lunch meat slabber. That's perfect. Like slobber, like from a dog. Slab, like a slab of lunch meat. That's what we're talking about. Perfect. Yeah, we're probably not going to come up with very many good ones like that. At least on the fly. Okay. What next? We got to get into the fruit here a little bit. We do something with like lemons and like a squirter. Yeah, how about this? Um, Lemon squirt. So this would be almost like a poison. I'm not quite sure if I want it to be a poison or just like acid-based attack. Um, like squeezer better. Squeezes itself to emit lemon juice that damages. That's pretty fine. Um, Here's a little quirk for this one. Often attaches to other mobs to uh, whatever, to beef them up. You imagine a spaghetto rolling up with a couple of lemon squeezers on its shoulder, and it's blasting you with lemon juice while it's wrapping you up with spaghetti noodles. That's what we're going for. Okay. While I'm thinking about it, maybe I should mention so the other big change with kind of um, the world building behind Delving High was that I decided to make the timeline of Aurora and the whole sim thing. I shifted it back a lot, so it's actually starting with chapter one. The first use of the sim is chapter one, rather than this idea of the sim being active. Rather than that being around for many years before the story takes place, I shifted it so chapter one starts with not only the character's first time in the sim, but anybody's first time in the sim. And the idea there was if I rewind the clock, then I've got a much more natural reason to kind of over explain a little bit of what's going on, why things are happening. It makes it gives me a little more grace to lean into, like, a teacher can say, uh, and I'm probably not gonna have a great example, but teacher could say, like, logistically with the timeline of how often we're going in sim. Like I think it's gonna be like a once a week thing, basically, or maybe once a day. Doesn't really matter as long as the frequency is kind of the same. But instead of like needing Jack to figure that out or to listen to a teacher like say it once, I can have the teachers be confused about it because this is the first time they've ever had to do something other than teach English or math or whatever. This is their first time like teaching these new crazy subjects and then overseeing this whole in sim thing. So the teachers are confused about it, they're talking about it more, and suddenly it's not me using Jack to ask a very obvious piece of exposition. I think stuff like that, it's probably not a great example, but you can see the idea. Um, so yeah, how that was going to connect here to the point I was going to make about myth, food, and tech is that since this is the first year that the sim has been around, um, it also gives me a lot more wiggle room to not have things be smooth and refined and polished. So the fact that I'm trying to have three distinct types of mobs, uh, at first that might look like, oh, that's going to be weird. You know, if you're going to have a dragon flying next to a bagel blaster, flying next to a frozen pole, you know, that's crazy. But that's sort of the idea is this whole sim thing was like a last second deployed effort to save the world. And the fact that it's not extremely refined is hopefully just reinforces that idea that this was just thrust out there to try to like in this sort of last ditch effort to save everything. So, long explanation of why we have three types of mobs for each class here. All right, let's see if we can come up with another food. Need some bugs, don't we? Bugs aren't really food, but let's see. Ooh, how about an ant colony? I like this a lot. So this is like a, what's it called in Clash Royale, where the skeletons keep coming out of the little the tombstone. Call this call it a minion, I guess. So the ant colony is going to emit an ant every few seconds, gradually grows stronger. Do we want to do that? Or stays the same? Congratulations, I think we just created two mobs. So let's call an ant colony where it stays the same. And then we need another name here for the ant colony that emits ants that gradually get stronger. Maybe we'll call it a queen ant. Do ants have queens? Maybe I should know this. Yes, ants do have queens. All right, stick with that. All right, so you can see we've got two sort of distinct styles here. Ant colony is more of a spammer. It's going to rain a bunch of ants on you. The queen ant is something that the enemy mobs would want to protect. Give it some time to scale up until it's releasing stronger and stronger ants. Maybe let's do a couple easy ones here. Give the brain a break. So for tank and myth, obviously we're going to have like troll. Actually, I've got a list started somewhere. I think these, let's see. Yeah, let's just grab all of these and pull them in here. Figure out where they go later. That's not really what I was going for. All right, what would be a tank in here? Gargoyle. I thought I had a Cyclops too. Definitely like a Cyclops. Zombie, that's going to be, you guessed it, a Swarmer. I guess super aggressive and Swarmer are sort of the same. Just combine those. Yeah, we'll just combine them. Okay, so the zombie goes up here. Description, it's a zombie. I don't know about those. So I've got Swarmer copied over, so we're good there. Go up here, we've got a hatchling. I think the purpose of this is just going to be It's not really going to be a danger. It's just a bit of world building texture. And what it says is, if there are enemy mobs that are hatchlings, then you're going to find some later that are drakes. You're going to find some later that are dragons. We'll put this one in minion, I guess. Okay. Um, Ranged, we'll go Drake. We all know what a Drake is, and we'll go Dragon. Yeah, that'll be fun to get to, but that's probably more of a sophomore year thing. Hag, we could have, no, kind of trying to stay away from anything that's really like humanoid. Really don't want there to be much blood in this at all. Um, I even don't know about things like gremlins or goblins. I think let's just save those for potential sophomore year. Yeah. Now I'm really wondering actually about if a nice breakpoint is if it's got blood, then it's not. Yeah, let's do that. If it's got blood, we'll save it for sophomore year. Basically, I don't really mind ants. Sorry, ants. Um, but this other stuff, let's trim out of there. Troll. Gargoyle could stay, I guess. Yeah, we'll just stick with that blood idea. All right. All right. Well, that's gonna hurt my idea about myth pretty significantly because I think most things in mythology have some blood. Hmm. Well, let's just start thinking a little bit about some plant-based mobs. I think there's a lot of potential there. We're looking at debuffs, crowd control, um, all sorts of interesting mechanics. We'll go with the Venus flytrap. That's got to be in there for sure. Venus flytrap. Maybe dare we change myth? Whoops. So we just do it the other way. Goodbye myth. Hello plant. All right. So Venus flytrap. I don't know about that. What's a plant that has many, many layers? And I'm looking for some sort of a cocoon thing that is similar to our queen ant colony where it takes a while to strengthen up, but then it releases something pretty strong. Not sure if I can think of anything. So, good thing about fantasy is we can make stuff up. Let's call this, let's put this in quirky. Um, so, it's going to have a name, but the description is 2 phases. First phase is layering petals to create cocoon, and cocoon breaks and creature comes out. Use some sort of a plant bug thing. So petal could be in this, I think. Petal, petal case, petal chest, petaloon. Could be a little bit of a portmanteau. I don't know if I love that one. If it was petaloon, we could call this a loon and have sort of lean into it that way. This loon would be whatever comes out after the petal cocoon breaks. Petal coon? How about that? Oh, I like that a lot better. Okay, petal coon. Call this a coon, I guess. Hmm. So, I mean, it could be like a raccoon. That a little bit too much on the nose. Hmm. Yeah, I don't really have a lead of like what come out of here. I mean, it could be something like a butterfly. I guess that would sort of make sense. Like a plant-based butterfly. Actually do that. So the wings have to be beautiful. Flowers. How about hypnotic magic? Strong spells. That's kind of sort of interesting. I do like Petal Coon. I think that's a name that's gonna stick. Obviously, the leading strategy here for names is just to do a little portmanteau, stick two names kind of together, maybe trim a little bit off so it flows. Of course, you get a lot of association by doing that. You're not starting completely from scratch. If we did create a mob that was unassociated with sort of anything obvious, then it's probably helpful to just come up with a new name from scratch. That's that's good. Okay, back to plants. Let's see. I think a tank plant would pretty naturally um, be something that regrows very well. It's not my area of expertise, but um, like some sort of a tree that is, I guess a tree would be a little bit different. Let's stick with the tree for now. I mean, something like an oak tree is a little bit too obvious. We need some interesting stuff to it. So oak trees drop acorns. Acorns can do stuff. How about we go with that? Um, do we want it to be a tank? It almost be ranged. It's gonna be dropping acorns. I think I'm back to quirky. These categories don't really matter. It's more of a stimulus to get me thinking in that quadrant. Um, but for now, let's just call it an oak tree. How about an oak shaker? The tree shakes and drops acorns. Um, Acorns could have debuffs. They could just be minor damage. Could be something else. How about this? Because I'm trying to think about something interesting that this would present in the fight. If the acorns aren't destroyed, then they uh, very quickly regrow into more. For some reason, I don't love the idea of them growing into more oak trees. It'd be more interesting if they grew into other stuff, like semi-random plants that would just present a strew of, different debuffs or play styles, things like that. Drops various acorns, various nuts, um, nuts and seeds. Assortment. of random shrubbery, plants, trees quickly grows out of the ground under. So that's sort of interesting because now you got to decide, do you target the droppings or do you try and take out the main tree to stop the onslaught from coming? We have to add a little debuff on this or a little nerf so it's not too overpowered. We could give it a finite number of stuff. We could say it's um, like I'm just trying to think, why isn't it always dropping acorns and stuff to create like a big army? We could just say it's not very smart and it only starts fighting once it gets attacked. It's probably fine. And that gives us some flexibility later. If we need like a boss mob, we could have one of these oak shakers be a little bit like smarter. And it's been setting up for a few days and it's got like a little forest around it full of stuff that's grown and um, yeah, that's kind of interesting. More plants. We've got vines. Vines feel like natural traps. Let's put those in. Quirky. How about super aggressive, just for fun? I would call it like a thorn braid or a thorn rope, or like thorn braid's probably fine. A vine containing many thorns. Ouch. So I'm picturing this as just a basic, super basic mob. No real flavor to it. Just a little bit of damage if you step on it or rub against it. We can have variations of it that are presented later. Um, so assuming our reader gets pretty used to seeing thorn braids all around, then if we are going to a boss fight or something, we identify or inspect something, and it's called a venom braid. I think that's going to be pretty obvious what that does. Okay. Pretty good. Now let's try and start getting more creative. We have a plant. How about a plant that emits some sort of like a ice magic? I'm thinking of Arctic, tundra. How about a tundra spat? Tundra spat? That up here in magic, I guess. Opens blossom to emit uh, rose and mist, ice magic damage. It's probably worth saying as well, for a lot of these things, like we're writing down basically one attack. I'm picturing that as kind of its calling card, like its main thing. But if, we imagine this tundra spat is basically, a big flower with kind of a solid base of vines and shrubbery and stuff. Um, it'll probably still be whacking around with its appendages and that sort of thing. So they'll be doing other stuff than just you know the marsh swallow swallowing stuff. Like they're going to be doing other stuff, but this is kind of the what makes them stand out. All right, I like the idea of ice plants. How about we here's something interesting. You always are going back to the Christmas Story movie. You're always worried about icicles falling down on you. Um, put this in quirky. You're always worried about icicles falling down on you. Uh, let's make one that hangs on the ceiling and drops icicles. Magically reinforced, of course. That seems kind of cool. Um, I like having sickle in the name. Could even be sickler. Be nice if the name kind of evoked a sense of like them being on the ceiling or the icicle falling down. Like a sickle swinger was what came to mind, but that doesn't really work. Icickler, sickle dive. You know how high sickle looks. Sickle. Yeah, actually that's really nice because it sounds like icicle, but it's icicle. To say the obvious. Okay, I think that works. See if we can get any more ice stuff here. Ice can fall from up. It can also be down on the ground. So let's get something like that. Let's put this in the tank category. We need some tank plants. I'm picturing something that basically makes like an ice rink around it, so it debuffs the movement of everybody else. So rink would actually be nice, nice part of the name. Slowly turns ground to ice, emits ice-based debuffs around it. All right, so what are we gonna call this fella? Bomb. How about this? A bomb rink, like a bomb, like an abominable snowman. Stick with that for now, I guess. Bomber rink. Okay. Other ice-based plants. Hmm. We could have a something that turns to ice on you, like if it really wraps you up and then turns to ice, and its thing is like it basically traps you. That's new. That would definitely be super aggressive. Um, Ice Hug is about the most basic name. We're gonna have to beef that up a little bit, but it's gonna be a viney. Uh, Trying to figure out how to get the word briar in there, but anyway, it's a viney thing that wraps you up like a snake and freezes. I like the idea if it just immediately freezes. I feel like that could be kind of interesting. And if you pretty much if you um, enact that in a certain way in combat and it just like instantly freezes, that's sort of cool. Its trigger could be if it like gets down to 2% health or whatever. Um, so snap, like a cold snap, is I think that's good. Plus, snap is gonna excuse me. Snap is going to be kind of reminiscent of if you have to break out of it, like you snap, it's gonna snap as you break it. So I think snap definitely earns a place. We just need kind of another word or another part of a word to drive home, like a death snap. Death snap or death snap. I don't know if I can pronounce that well enough for us here, but death snap or death snap. I do like that. And, if the idea is, here we go, here's what's going to bring it together. When it explodes, big damage. So you get wrapped up by this thing. You're either um, death snap, you either break it and it pretty much kills you because it does a lot of damage. So that would be the death snap. Or death snap would be you're basically stuck in there because you don't want to break it and die. So you're just, it's almost like a nap. You're just stuck. So I like that death snap. That's going to definitely stick. That and one of these other ones is probably Lunchmeat Slabber. Yeah, for sure. Those are my two favorite ones so far, I think. Cracker Jack's pretty good. Uh, Icicle is pretty good. We're getting some good ones in here. Bagel Blaster is probably not going to win any awards. But okay. All right, we're kind of getting a nice picture of some ice plant things. If I was really smart, I would probably make kind of a Eisenhower matrix or something of, here's the various uh, variables we're playing with, like ice, fire, things like that. And then add another row for plants, add another row for the classes, and start to just fill it out kind of logically. But I think it's more fun to just bounce around. Can't always do things as efficient as possible. All right, more ice plants. I think that's what we're all learning. We need more ice plants. How about a alchemy? Not alchemy, that might not be the right word. Picturing another time-based mob that gets stronger with time. Put this in quirky. Alchemy probably is the right word. As time goes on, the fruit of the plant gets colder, closer to final form. So I'm picturing this thing is gonna chill itself. Call it a chill bloom for now, I guess. Gonna chill itself, and then when the fruit gets to a certain point, it's going to change. So what? Yeah, yeah. It's hard, sorry, it's hard to keep some of these thoughts straight. So when the fruit gets totally cold, it's going to change, and either maybe it explodes, maybe it gives the plant a buff. Ooh, I like that a lot better actually. Um, so then the plant gets stronger, and then its play style changes. Actually, with a thought I had that I have not said yet, that's going to make this into a tank. So initially, mob is passive, just trying to protect fruits. After buffs, it becomes aggressive. So hopefully the name would communicate something about that, like I'm picturing this as sort of a humanoid, you know, plant um, that is kind of hunkered over, hunched over, protecting the fruit um, or the blooms. Fruit. Hmm. Yeah, let's do it like this. When blooms get fully cold, they open. How about a hunch bloom? Or because at first this thing is basically going to be like hunched over all of the blooms, trying to protect them. And then once the blooms open, it's going to be super strong. I think that's fine. Hunch bloom. Of course, it doesn't make a lot of sense that as it gets colder, the blooms open, but I think that's part of the cool fantasy stuff you get to do. Call these ice blooms. All right. Um, what else can we do with ice plants? Not really expecting to be talking about ice plants for half an hour today. Let's see, what's the word I'm looking for? There's ice, there's fire. Don't, we could do electricity. Let's probably do that because we're going to have some tech stuff. Those are probably the main aesthetics. Probably I want the most of fire-based stuff because in our classes we've got like pyro, which is pretty much bombs and fire. We've got that. A lot of the mages are fire-based. So if there's mobs that are fire-based, I think that's nice. That's sort of the aesthetic we've already got going. We might as well do more. Ice. What are we missing? We've got ice magic, one, ranged. Um, oh yeah, we took out drakes and dragons, which is awful. Very sad, but we must. Can we get a ranged ice thing? How about this? Oh, this is interesting. So we need a plant that emits water. There's got to be some sort of sea thing, I'm thinking. Um, but the thought was it's got the ability to rapidly cool down something. And if it can spray water out, the water is pretty much going to freeze in like an arc of ice. So it's almost like an arrow or a lance that just gets shot out and it freezes as it goes. Sea lance. Well, I think lance could be in the name for sure. Um, Now a cactus would be not what you'd expect. Right, cactuses can hold a lot of water. That's one of their things. But you would not expect it to shoot out an ice lance. I'm wondering if something like coral is better here. Um, I don't really know a lot about coral though. I do know cactuses hold water, so I think let's stick with that. There are certain trees that hold water really well. Also don't know what those are called. Let's just stick with the cactus. So humanoid cactus. I will not be naming this Cacturn, even though I like Pokemon. Humanoid cactus that stores water, draws it out of the air. A note here that will help me later. Noticeably dry environment, 2 characters. All right, so what do we have so far? It's a humanoid cactus that stores water by drawing it out of the air, which makes the environment much more dry to the characters. Emits water in a blast that freezes. Like a, it freezes, acting like an arrow. How about this? Cactance? Is that is that close enough? Cactus and lance? I think let's go with that. Or it could be cactaro. That might be a little bit more fun. Cactaro. I feel like we've got something else with a row. Do we? Oops. Did not mean to jump into that. Alright. Cactaro, welcome to the squad. Can we do anything else in the ranged ice department with plants? Like I said, the goal is probably at least 100, but probably more mobs that I can pull. If it starts getting pretty tough, what I would probably do is start making variations. So, um, like we've got our cactus here. We could have another variation of the cactus that is fire and another that's electric and kind of do it that way. Because then you really only need to come up with, 100 sort of unique ones. And then everything else is a little bit like um, where was our icicle? Like, you could very easily see this being a heatsicle. And spits lava, pretty obvious. Um, and then you could have electricicle. Yeah, that's a mouthful. Hangs on ceiling and shoots sparks slash lightning. So, I mean, some of these would be pretty easy like that, and all of a sudden you've got, two more unique mobs, and depending on your environment, what sort of challenge you're trying to present to the students, like that's pretty easy. But we still got to kind of lay out a bunch of unique ones in the first place. So I think I'm back to this ranged spot. Since Jack is ranged, I think it makes sense. What we want is some really interesting fights for him. We can't have all of them just be, him sitting back and just sending in arrows. He's got to have some counterplay. Um, so let's see if we can come up with some counterplay here. How about, um, boy, this is gonna be a little bit complicated. This is a wild idea. I'm almost out of my juice as well, so we'll see how long I can keep going after that. Um, lava. Let's call it a lava pool bud for now. Um, some sort of fire-based plant sitting in a pool of water, steam everywhere, uh, has the ability to flash freeze the steam. Steam gradually builds to cover more space. So I think you can see that's kind of a scaling idea. It's another one of those ones where characters are fighting this creature. The longer it survives, the more the steam is going to spread, and then the bigger attack it can unleash. Um, and why I thought of that with relation to counterplay was I could see it having a counter attack where you shoot an arrow at it and then it just freezes the air around it, and blocks the arrow or freezes the arrow. Maybe this thing can even freeze like a certain part of the steam. Let's do that. Why not make it harder for poor Jack? We're not writing those scenes right now, so we don't need to worry about it. All right. So this is basically going to be immune to like ranged attacks, because it can just freeze the arrows out of the air, unless you shoot them in like the same spot really fast before the steam can repop disperse there or diffuse there. So that's cool. The name Lava Pool Flat. I sort of like Flash Freeze. I mean, that's what we're going for. It's kind of similar to that Snap, but a little bit different. Um, Lava Flash Pool. Gosh, this is hard. I'm trying to communicate that it's in the water, but it's fire based. Hmm. What's a gull? I think a gull is not talking about the bird. Talking about like a little puddle. Where are we at here? How about lava pud flash? Can't really. Just call it a lava pud. Stick with that for now. Nothing's really obvious, it seems like. All right, more ranged plant stuff. I mean, while we're in tech, obviously there's got to be some sort of ballista mount thing. Gatling gun with arrows. Definitely not introducing guns into this, but anything with arrows is pretty much fair game. Um, yeah. So, just to recap, I think the ranged section ought to be like twice as long as any other section for sure, because we want to be able to sprinkle a lot of these in throughout the scenes, sprinkle in variations of these. What about a plant that does something with thorns over a distance? Like, what could a plant really shoot? Typically, it would just be thorns. What about a thorn? I already use spat, so I can't call it a thorn spat. Thorn thrower is pretty basic. What if we do like thornier? Thornier? Hmm, thorner? I kind of like thorner. I mean, it's pretty basic, but I'm imagining this being one of the more basic mobs. And for something we're going to see fairly often, I'm going to give that a bold. I think that's okay. We don't need every mob to have like a ton of flavor text to it. Hmm. How about a Oh gosh, there's got to be some potential here. I'm shifting to thinking about a fire plant that's ranged, like a boil bomb. About a boil bomb. It's not gonna get much better than that. Plant that grows some kind of boil that is protected, explodes in a random spray of like fire magic, we'll call it. So this is pretty similar to the cactaloon or whatever we called it earlier, petal coon, where this one grows a uh, like a coon. I guess we're gonna. Oh, we should probably. Yeah, whatever. Well, we probably should change this coon to something else. From buttercoon. I don't know. We'll let the night crew finish that one off. But yeah, you can see petal coon. Same sort of idea with boil bomb, where it's a scaling thing. It takes a while, but then it has something pretty powerful happen. I think this is kind of fun. This could, you know, hit from pretty far away. Maybe I'll put these next to each other so that it's kind of more obvious to me when I'm writing later. So fire ranged. While we're talking about plants, or I should say about traps, I feel like I ought to put the traps on their own area. Hmm. Just for now, let me just make a trap area. And I'm going to move the fly trap, thorn braid, venom blade. And then the new one I was just thinking of was like a I guess that just spells volcano. I was pronouncing that differently. Um, a Vulk, we call them that maybe. Um, Mini volcano that uh, emits fire if stepped on. That's pretty obvious. Since it's small, we should give it like a cute little name, maybe like Volky. Um, that idea of putting a like a Y or an I on the end of words to make them sound more kiddish. It's called a hypochorism. One of the few things I remember from English from college. Um, but kind of a neat tool if you're trying to like infantilize, is that the correct word? I suppose so. If you're trying to infantilize a concept, you can add a Y onto it and it'll make it seem a little bit smaller, a little bit more fun. Like tummy. All right, I feel like there were a few other traps I was trying to move down. The icicle, those things. Very good. Um, and I think we were back up here on range. We were trying to come up with some more fire range stuff. Hmm. Maybe let's shift. Oh, Well, let's stick with the fire stuff for a while. Maybe we'll just try and think of fire plants in general. So we could have a tank, a fire tank. Let's picturing something that is got fire actually burning inside of the plant, and its little trick is that it can. Uh, this would present some problems, but I was gonna say it could like melt your sword or do kind of damage like that if you stab into it. Um, Pop sap. I think pop sap might be that pop. How does this look? Yeah, I think pop sap's better. So pop sap, meaning it's on fire, all the sap in it is popping. Large ogre shaped plant that has fire in its belly. Um, let's simplify this a little bit and just say if stabbed, emits some fire. So that's kind of the quirk is maybe you don't want to be right next to it or you don't want to be like standing right in front of the hole if you're like after you stab it. I like the idea of making this more interesting. Like if this is going to be a large enemy, we could say it um, eventually dies on its own after all sap has popped. A little too strong typically for students. Stronger than it appears. Hopefully one of those notes uh, will work for me. I'm thinking if this mob is like the same level as the students, typically that means they should be fine, but I think it's cool to have some that are stronger than they appear. Like they're a little bit uh, they're a real danger, even if they don't appear that way. So to nerf this guy by saying he eventually will just run out of sap if you kind of stay away, I think that's interesting. Give some opportunities for the smarter students to play around. All right, another fire tank. Um, how about one that here's interesting. This is something thinking about like Fortnite and a lot of the battle royale games with decreasing circle size. Let's say call it an encircler for now, but let's say it grows vines around um, the seed or whatever. Vines eventually start on fire. New vines grow in a smaller circle. So if you've got a few mobs you're fighting and they're protecting one of these encirclers, this thing is going to uh, like tunnel or not tunnel, but it's going to grow around. It's going to grow vines around the students. Eventually, those vines are going to get caught on fire, and then it's going to keep sort of pulling the students closer to itself, and eventually kind of trap them in the middle. That's a neat mechanic. I'll need lots of tanks because it's pretty fun for uh, like tanks are probably the coolest thing to take down, I would say. because you kind of got to fight for it. Some of these other ones, like they're very dangerous, but once Jack hits him with a couple arrows or whatever, they're probably done. Tanks are kind of fun because you can really stretch that out in a different way. So I'm trying to give a nice sprinkling of these here, at least. I am curious, let's say there are 200 of these we can come up with. I'm curious if that's all the novel will take, or if I'm going to find myself just trying to create new things all the time. Who knows? Okay, fire tank. Hmm, let that rest a little bit. Fire magic plant. How about a fume? Do a fume-based thing. I think I've already got something called a fumigator. Did I already make something like that? Fumigate. Fumigist. Okay. That's a class of the pyro, so I think we can safely take fumigator here. I've got to admit, fumigator looks a lot like alligator. So I think we better do an alligator-based fume plant. It's kind of wild to untangle. Alligator-based fume plant. Opens mouth. No teeth. But emits debuff fumes. That's kind of wild. Um, Mobile. Because this is an alligator and not a plant that's stuck in place. Okay, that's kind of fun. Anything else we can do with fumes? We could go down. Let's go down and make a trap that's fume based because everybody likes traps. Gives Jack something to look for. I'm thinking of like some sort of blossom or I'm kind of blanking on the right word, but something that pops when you step on it and emits a fume. So in our traps here, we've got Venus flytrap, which is just going to be high damage. Um, this new one, unnamed, which is going to be a debuff. We've got Thorn Braid, which is light damage. Venom Braid, that's going to be poison. Obviously a debuff, but it's going to be health, health-based debuff. Volky, that's going to be fire. These ones are pretty much all straight damage with a little bit of nuance. So I'm thinking this is really our only one that's like a true catch-all for debuffs. So if we can come up with a nice name for it, and then create like a few variations that we can really sprinkle in, I'm seeing this has a lot of potential to be a very versatile trap for us to sprinkle throughout. Get these poor students. Um, Crinkle is a word that's standing out to me. A variation of pop would be helpful. Like a crink pop. Yeah, I'm not sure if I like crink pop enough. You know what? Rather than having multiple variations, I think having one could still be interesting. And we could just say very difficult to tell what variety it is and what debuff it contains. I think that presents some fun opportunities where, uh, you can sort of build tension or take it away by the debuff being worse or better than the reader would expect. what else other than pop? I feel like, have I used pop? Sometimes these things, pop sap, yeah. But that's pretty different. Yeah, that's pretty different from a trap. This, like this crank pop is going to be super common, or like relatively much more common than a pop sap will be. Like we'll probably see one or two of these in the whole book, I would imagine, probably. Whereas, you might see hundreds of crank pops throughout the place. Okay, so that's a good step in the right direction for our plant traps. I think we were back to, oh yeah, that was our second fume thing for fire. Hmm, ranged fire. Let's see. Going back down here and thinking about this, I'm wondering if Crink Pod is better. Crink Pop? Crink Pod? Hmm. What about Boil Pod? Also, have we used Boil? Hard boiled egg. Don't think that's gonna stay. Boil bomb. Yeah, and that's kind of a. I like Boil Pod. Boil Pop. What about Boil Pop? Let's stick with Boil Pod. Final answer. That is going to be our common trap. Is a Boil Pod. I can't take it back, can I? What about a Fume Pod? All right, we'll stick with Boil Pod. Okay. Where were we? What about super aggressive fire? That sure seems to go together. All right, this is maybe a little bit more of the ice variety, but I'm thinking about, for some reason, in winter, like a really dry wood crackles a lot when it is on fire. I'm thinking if we lean into that idea a little bit, um, we lean into that idea a little bit and say there's like a wood-based creature that explodes parts of itself. Well, we've got a lot of these little. I suppose this is super aggressive, but I was going to say we've got a lot of these kind of bomber things. Would this crackle thing I'm thinking of basically be a variation of the boomwalker? I think it is. I think I'm sort of repeating myself here. If it's a different aesthetic though, I think it's probably okay. Considering these things will be mentioned here and there probably. We may even see both of them like through the course of the book, but it's not like these are our only two mobs and we're just switching back and forth. About Crackle Log, we yeah, I like this better. Rather than Crackle Log, we change it to Crackle Log. We still have the same sort of phonetic structure, but with that K in there, I think that makes this look a little bit more like dangerous. It's a little bit less friendly. Um, yeah, and let's make these a little more distinct from the boom marker by, the boom marker is basically just a walking explosion. We're going to make this a humanoid wood creature that is skilled at fighting, grappling. Key attack is to generate fire in hand until it explodes. That's where the fire stuff is coming from. So this is more of a hand-to-hand combat mob that also has a explosion ability, rather than the boom walker, which is just a walking jelly maker. All right. Fire, fire, fire. And we can, grow past plant a little bit to include like rock stuff. Like that's definitely fine. We're gonna be summoning golems. Like the different mages have golems, so we could just get kind of basic here, like fire golem, ice golem, stone golem, storm golem. Probably just pulling things out of my old Skyrim memory here. I think that's fine. You just add those in. Oh, what got me thinking about that was creating some sort of a rock fire thing. What would this mechanic be? Could be hot to the touch. Hmm. I want to stay away from just like everything exploding. I feel like we've got some of those already. Hmm. Could just be combat focused. Um, Combat focused rock guy with fire in him. Uh, High defense, very slow. Gotta nerf him somehow. So then what would our name be for this? Super slow. It's probably grinding as he walks. How about this? Let's make this more interesting. As his joints rub, emits some smoke, or not smoke, what am I trying to say? We'll just call it fume, because we're in the brainstorming stage, not the writing stage. So this guy's saying he's a tank, super tough to take down, and over the course of combat, he's emitting more of this debuff. So smog, that's something we can do. Let's say rock coal guy. That fits smog a little bit better. Smog grinder. Smog. How does this look? Oh, I do not like the two G's in there. Smog. Smogger? Smogger fine? I feel like smogger's kind of a fun word. Oh, how about this? Smogback. Done. Like anytime you put something like back or just a strong word like that in there, it's like, okay, everybody knows this is a tank. Smogback, welcome to the club. Boy, don't you just love to see the tank uh, class grow here? Fire tank. I gotta say, hopefully this is interesting. It's fun for me. Slow going, but it's much easier than writing a book. It is fun to try to find a new mechanic or just kind of create something interesting. We gotta have some flame sprites. I don't really know what those will do or how they'll be interesting, but I think just having some of those around could be fun. How about we make something that makes these more relevant? So down here in Quirky, um, is not going to be a plant, but let's make a flame sprite lord, ice sprite lord, final evolution of sprites. We'll do something like this, um, kind of mimicking the pizza idea we had earlier. Um, which was somewhere. I'm forgetting. Oh, pizza, where they join together and get a lot of buffs. We could have a bunch of like flame sprites and ice sprites running around, and if they can combine, it's like a snowman situation. It's stronger. Snow babies. I don't know if I like that word baby in there. Snowlings. How about that? All right. Because snowman was such a good analogy, I think we need to lean into that. Forget about the Forget about these. So snowlings are going to be very weak. They're going to go into the Snow Lord. Mega Snowman. Yeah, I think that's a winner right there. How do you beat snowlings into a Snow Lord? That is pretty good. How about we've got that interesting idea with the oak somewhere. Oh, here it is, oak shaker. We could have something with like icicles, or not icicles, snowflakes. Do snowflaker something. Um, how about an icy volcano that emits snowflakes with debuffs? That's kind of cool. All right. I think that might be a decent place to end this one. Um, I will certainly be coming back to do some more of these. That might be a future episode. But I think just for the sake of time, call this one here and we will take another swing at it later. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it.